A stranger burst into my room without knocking, and in that frozen second, everything I had buried for 28 years cracked wide open. I was standing in the middle of my tiny Chicago apartment, phone still clutched in my hand after hanging up on my mother's weekly guilt trip about finding a nice girl back in Texas. Tears hot on my cheeks as I whispered to the empty air, I can't keep pretending I'm straight anymore. The guy who stepped through the door, tall, dark-haired, wearing a faded Blackhawks hoodie and carrying a toolbox, froze too, his blue eyes widening like he'd walked in on a crime scene instead of breakdown. He raised both hands fast. Whoa, sorry, wrong key. Building manager said 4B was empty for maintenance. I'm Jake, the new tenant next door. I thought you looked like you were having some kind of emergency. His voice was calm, Midwestern steady, but there was something gentle underneath that made my stomach flip instead of just panic. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, heart hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. It's 4D, I managed, voice cracking. Door must have stuck again. He didn't laugh or back out awkwardly like most straight guys would have. He just nodded, set the toolbox down, and asked, "You okay, man? Looked pretty rough in there." That was the misunderstanding. He thought I was crying over a girl, or money, or some normal guy problem. I let him think it because the truth felt like a grenade with the pin already pulled. We ended up sitting at my tiny kitchen table, drinking the cheap coffee I kept for nights like this. Jake told me he'd just moved from Milwaukee for a photography gig downtown, that he knew the building super from a softball league, and that Chicago winters were no joke compared to what he was used to. I told him my name, Alex, and that I designed apps for a health tech startup, the kind of safe, boring answer that kept people from asking deeper questions. But when he glanced at the framed photo of my family on the fridge, mom, dad, my sister in her cheerleader uniform from high school, he asked if they lived close. I lied and said they were still in Texas. The lie tasted like metal. By the time he left an hour later with a promise to bring over better coffee tomorrow, my hands had stopped shaking. I locked the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since college. Jake had no idea he'd just walked straight into the one secret I'd sworn I'd take to my grave. And somehow, that made the secret feel a little less heavy. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. Coffee delivery at your door. Didn't want to knock again and scare you. Jake. A paper cup and a blueberry muffin sat on the mat. I smiled before I could stop myself. That small kindness cracked the door open wider than any misunderstanding ever could. Jake started showing up more than I expected. Not in a creepy way, just neighbor stuff at first. He'd knock with 2 coffees, ask if I wanted to split a pizza while he edited photos on my couch because his place still smelled like fresh paint. I told myself it was nothing, but every time he laughed at my dumb jokes or asked real questions about my work instead of glazing over, something warm spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. One night, after a long day of pretending to care about straight guy small talk at the office, I came home to find him waiting in the hallway with takeout tie and a 6-pack. "You looked wrecked when you left this morning," he said simply. We ate on the floor like college kids, and somehow the conversation turned to family. He told me his parents had been cool when he came out at 19, supportive even, marching in pride with rainbow shirts they still wore every June. I stared at my noodles and felt the familiar knot tighten. "Must be nice," I muttered. He didn't push, just nodded like he understood there was more and was willing to wait. That was when the first real crack appeared in my armor. I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to notice. The way his hair curled at the nape of his neck when it was damp from the shower, how his voice dropped when he talked about a tough photo shoot, the easy way he touched my shoulder when he laughed. I told myself it was friendship, safe. But late at night, alone, I replayed every moment and felt the old fear rise like bile. What if he figured it out? What if he left? What if my parents found out? The following weekend, my sister called. She was getting married and wanted me to bring someone special to the Texas wedding in 3 months. Mom had already picked out the daughter of their church friend. I hung up and paced the apartment until Jake knocked again. This time I didn't hide the panic. "Family stuff," I said when he asked. He sat on the couch and listened while I danced around the truth, talking about pressure, expectations, the way love felt like a cage sometimes. He didn't offer advice. He just said, "You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that isn't real, Alex." Those words landed like a lifeline I didn't know I needed. By the end of that week, we were spending most evenings together. He taught me how to frame a shot with my phone. I showed him the best hole-in-the-wall tacos in Logan Square. Friendship, I kept repeating. But when he hugged me goodbye one night and I caught the scent of his cologne, I realized the misunderstanding wasn't just his anymore. I was lying to myself, too. The first time Jay took me to a rooftop bar downtown, I almost backed out. "It's just drinks with some of my photographer friends," he said, but I knew what it really was. An invitation into a world I had only watched from the outside. The place was bright, loud, full of guys who laughed without checking over their shoulders. Jake introduced me around like I belonged there. No one asked if I was his boyfriend. No one cared. For the first time in my life, I felt the tight band around my chest loosen. We stayed late. On the walk home through the cold Chicago night, he told me about his last serious relationship. The one that ended because the guy couldn't handle Jake's job, taking him away for weeks at a time. I told him about the guy in college I'd never let myself name out loud. The words came easier than I expected. When we reached our building, he stopped under the streetlight and looked at me for a long second. "Thanks for trusting me with that," he said softly. Then he hugged me again, longer this time, and I let myself lean in. The next morning, I woke up terrified. I spent the whole day at work deleting and retyping texts to him before finally sending nothing. That evening, he knocked anyway, holding up a bag of my favorite tie. "You disappeared on me," he said. No accusation, just concern. We talked for hours. He admitted he'd felt something shift too. Not pressure, not expectation, just possibility. I didn't run. Instead, I asked if he wanted to watch a movie. We fell asleep on the couch, his head on my shoulder, and when I woke at 3 a.m. with his breathing steady against my neck, I didn't move away. Work got complicated after that. A new project manager started making comments about how quiet I was about my personal life. My best friend from the office, Mark, joked that I must have a secret girlfriend in another city. I laughed it off, but the lie tasted worse every time. Jake noticed. One night, he cooked dinner in my kitchen and said, "You don't have to tell anyone until you're ready. But you also don't have to carry it alone." That sentence cracked something open. For the first time, I let myself imagine what life could look like without the constant weight of pretending. My parents announced they were coming for a surprise visit to meet my new roommate after I accidentally mentioned Jake in a call. The word had slipped out when Mom asked who was helping me fix the leaky faucet. I panicked and told Jake everything. How conservative they were, how they still sent me Bible verses about marriage, how I'd never even hinted at the truth. He listened without flinching. "Then I'll be the world's most boring straight roommate for a weekend," he promised. We got this. The visit was a disaster wrapped in politeness. Mom hugged Jake too long and asked if he was seeing anyone. Dad talked football and grilled him about his job. I watched Jake deflect every question with easy smiles while my stomach twisted. That night after they went to their hotel, Jake sat on my bed and said, "You're shaking." I was. He pulled me into a hug, and for the first time I cried in front of someone without hiding why. He didn't kiss me. He just held on until the shaking stopped. The next morning, Mark from work texted me a screenshot of an old college photo someone had posted. Me at a party with my arm around a guy whose name I barely remembered. The caption read, "Alex's Wild Days." My blood ran cold. I showed Jake. He went quiet, then said, "Whatever happens, you're not facing it alone." That afternoon, my mother called, voice tight. "Your father saw that picture. We need to talk." The betrayal wasn't from Jake. It was from someone I'd trusted for years. The misunderstanding that started everything had snowballed into something I couldn't control anymore. The fight with my parents happened over video call while Jake sat out of frame, holding my hand off camera. Mom cried. Dad quoted scripture. They said they loved me, but couldn't accept this lifestyle. The words sliced deeper than I expected. I told them I was done pretending. When the call ended, I felt hollow and free at the same time. Jake didn't say, "I told you so." He just made tea and sat with me in the silence until I could breathe again. Work was worse. Mark avoided me. The project manager reassigned my biggest account for team balance. I came home one night to find Jake packing a bag. "I got a last-minute assignment in New York," he said, voice careful. 2 weeks. I can cancel. I shook my head. Go. I need to figure out who I am without leaning on you every second. It was the hardest sentence I'd ever spoken. He left the next morning with a kiss on my forehead that felt like goodbye and promise all at once. The 2 weeks were hell. I faced the whispers at work, the silent treatment from my sister's texts, the empty apartment. But I also started going to a local LGBTQ support group Jake had quietly suggested months earlier. I listened to men who had lost families and built new ones. I spoke for the first time in public. The night Jake's flight landed, I waited at the airport like a teenager. When he walked through security and saw me, his face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen. We didn't talk until we were back home. Then he said, "I missed you like crazy." That was when I finally kissed him, slow, deliberate, no more hiding. 6 months later, my sister got married in Texas. I brought Jake as my date. My parents didn't come to the rehearsal dinner, but they showed up at the ceremony. Dad shook Jake's hand. Mom hugged me tight and whispered, "We're trying." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't instant forgiveness. But it was a beginning. Jake and I moved into a bigger place with better light for his photography and a second bedroom I turned into a home office. I came out of work officially. Some people left. Others stayed and became real friends. The guy who once whispered his secrets to an empty room now woke up every morning next to the man who had walked in when he wasn't ready and stayed anyway. Life still had hard days. Family holidays were awkward sometimes. Old fears still whispered at 3 a.m. But the difference was I wasn't carrying them alone. Jake taught me that love isn't about being perfect or safe. It's about choosing each other even when the world makes it hard. Standing on our balcony one crisp Chicago evening watching the city lights, Jake slipped his arm around my waist and asked, "Any regrets?" I looked at him, the man who turned a misunderstanding into my entire future, and smiled. Only that it took a stranger walking through the wrong door to show me how to open the right one. True or false? Can one unexpected misunderstanding with a stranger truly be the turning point that allows a man to embrace his authentic self and love?